Hi, Shae Russell here from the Daily Reckoning Australia, and joining me today is my digital desk buddy, your other Daily Reckoning Australia editor, Callum Newman. Callum, welcome today.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I'm going to set a hard timer because you and I are known to talk under wet cement, so we're going to try and keep our chat to under 10 minutes today. Now, I just wanted to let you know we are going to start doing these chats weekly because whenever Callum and I get on the phone, we have these great in-depth conversations on the market, and we often waffle on for a good hour and exchanging ideas, and we realise that there's probably some great ideas that you, the viewer, can take away from these chats. All right, Callum, let's get started. I'm going to start questioning you today because first and foremost, we had a brief chat off camera before about silica sand, and my question to you was, what the hell is silica sand?
Well, yes, it's a very obscure little market. So, I mean, you follow the commodities space exclusively, basically. I sort of dip in and out depending on what piques my interest. And the full story actually it wasn't an idea of mine originally. My colleague, or our colleague actually, Catherine Cashmore, told me about a product called silica sand and how there was a shortage going on around the world. And I was like, oh, really? I didn't even know sand was a thing. And let me tell you, if you're watching this, sand is a very big thing because it's in so many different products, and mainly it's in concrete and glass. They're two huge markets. And when you look around the world, what's going on? Every single government around the world is stimulating their economies by pushing infrastructure. It's happening here in Australia at the state level and the federal level. It's happening in China, and we can see that with the high iron ore price. And so last year I dug into the story a bit more, and there's a whole trail of interesting things going on where a lot of Asian countries have banned the export of this stuff called silica sand. Because they want to preserve their home supply. Mm-hmm. And you go, okay, what is silica sand? Well, you can't just drive out to the desert and scoop up a bunch of sand and go, use this for your concrete or your glass. It has to be a certain grade and a certain shape, and it's only found in certain areas. Now, there's been a lot of illegal dredging of beaches and rivers historically throughout Asia to get this stuff because it's very profitable and they need it. But the governments are cracking down on that because it's really damaging their ecosystems, etc. So they have to find alternative sources. So there's a huge demand. In fact, there's a really cool story for Aussies. The Burj Khalifa in Dubai, the tallest building in the world right now, is full of Australian sand, like the concrete itself. So I started to look around the ASX for ways to play this, and there's a few companies that can do it. But basically, Australia is on the verge of having a whole new sector in the ASX, which will be companies trying to exploit this silica sand market. And there's a really big tidal wave of demand coming, not just from the construction, but from the glass market. One is obviously mobile phones are a huge market. But the really big one coming up is solar panels. If we're going to go to solar, we need solar panels on roofs and all that sort of stuff, and they need glass. And China is trying to dominate that sector, and they're running out of sand supply, so they have to import it. So there's opportunities, if you can find them, to sell it to them, basically.
This goes along with my theory, and I know I mentioned this in an editorial meeting just at the start of the week, or maybe it was at the start of last week. The weeks are starting to blur together already in 2021, and that is that, like, some people are calling it the super commodity cycle that's coming ahead, but I actually don't think it's a super commodity cycle. I think there's very selective commodities that are going to see a super cycle, and clearly silica sand is going to be one of them if it's all desperately needed for infrastructure of solar panels and mobile phones.
Well, it has every indication that it's going to be. And I agree with you. Like, I remember, I started with Port Phillip basically at the peak of the last mining cycle back in 2011.
Yes.
And ever since then, it's been a rough road for the miners in the sense where they've had lots of dips and wobbles along the way, and they've managed to get by paying down their debt and paying cash flow and things. But one thing they haven't really done is invest a lot because the prices were kind of good but not great. And And when you get a lag like that, it's going to show up at some point in higher prices. And we're getting the inklings of that now in copper, which, I mean, you're watching as well. But it's sort of like, well, there's been hardly any copper found for the last 10 years. The stuff they do find is not as good a grade as it used to be, and it's deeper and more expensive to get it out. So that kind of dynamic is just going to push up a lot of different things, and silica sand is part of that. Silica sand is a fairly small market compared to, you know, the iron ore and coal and all the big ones, oil, etc. But yeah, I mean, just the next 5 years, I think is going to be really, really fun for resource investors, and you're going to be sport for choice, basically.
Yeah, I actually completely agree with you, and I mean, I think I say this far too much in the Daily Reckoning Australia. Is I often start the newsletter with, you know, Australia hit the geological jackpot, and I'm sure I need to find a new hook, but it's true because, as you talk about, you know, there's pockets of underinvestment in the commodities market, and Australia's got pretty much most of what the world's looking for.
Yeah, not only that, we've got the what would you call the rule of law or the security? I think a lot of companies now are less willing to maybe go into Africa and some of the more remote or emerging markets than before, or at least investors anyway. So Australia, which is fairly secure, stable, educated. I mean, the hard part now, actually, if you listen, I mean, you know this as well as me, but, you know, they're sending off their samples to the labs and that. They're like, well, we're waiting. There's too much demand. We can't get them back.
I've made that comment just recently to somebody. A lot of my, as you know, I mean, I recommend gold stocks, and a lot of gold stocks have been kicked around. And one of my reasoning behind them is there's a lot of, basically there's assays stuck at the lab. You know, you've got to remember there's COVID safe protocols happening that are slowing down the process because there's only so many people allowed on site. But there are so many samples waiting to be assayed and sent back that there's just this huge backlog. And it's not just happening here in Australia. It's, throwing my pen around. It's affecting the North American markets as well. There's just this delay, this turnaround delay in getting the answers back out. So a lot of miners and explorers and developers that are waiting on results just haven't got that information. And I reckon some of the shares are getting kicked further down than necessary.
Well, the shares, if they can't get the news out, then that's sort of, you know, people get impatient at that time. And I was reading, I can't remember the actual company actually, and they sent it to Canada. It seems a long way to go. I don't know why we can't do it here in Australia, but they send their thing, their tests and stuff off to Canada, and it's like, well, no wonder it takes so long. But yeah, that's part of the dynamic. And so I think too, like last year I was reading, you know, trying to get companies, you know, if they're looking for a geologist, and like there's so much demand for them that they're hard to source because you've got lithium roaring back, you've got iron ore super strong. Gold was booming, still is booming in terms of its cash flow for the gold miners. Now rare earths has kicked up, silica sand, stuff like that. So nickel, all the battery items. So they're all competing for the same pool of labor, really, and the same capital and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's as an investor, it's great because you've got so much going on. There's so much opportunity.
I'm just going to double down on that. And this was a conversation I had with Rick Rule just recently, and we were talking, you know, and he mentioned that absolute underinvestment in exploration. And what's happened is a lot of geos basically get sick of being unemployed. And that's what happened when we've seen no investment in the commodities market for the past 5 years. So you'll often find a lot of them end up working in private equity. So a lot of them have come out of the exploration sector because it's unstable employment and moved into private equity, or they're now part of a technical team for a bank. So the industry has lost those resources. So it's now got to convince these highly skilled geologists to come back out into the field and get back into exploration work. Basically, there's a lot of companies that need to build teams from the ground up. One of the things Australia, I do know from speaking to people in the industry, is fortunate with is where we do very well at attracting international people to come work in Australia because of COVID. I can't see how our borders are suddenly going to lift up to let all these geos in. But in the past, we've normally been able to attract overseas talent. Not to discredit any of the geologists that we've got in Australia. There are some incredible exploration geologists in Australia. But right now that, they've been taken into different areas of the market because there was an underinvestment in exploration.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's all coming together for what could be a really, big 5 years. So we'll have to see how we go. But yeah, to finish, like in terms of Silica Sand, I'd say it's a theme that doesn't get, well, very few people follow it or even know about it because it's so new. And I've spoken to a couple of guys in the industry and they're like, they have to educate the brokers and the banks and investment analysts to say, this is a thing. Like sand is not just sand. You don't just go down the beach and, throw it in a slab of concrete. It has to be sourced and permitted and environmental approved. It's like a proper mine and processing plant. And so that story is it's a cliche, but it's under the radar. So it's one to follow certainly for the next 5 years.
Now, this is what you're really good at, Callum. You're really good at picking stories that the market hasn't caught on to yet. So that is an absolute strength of yours.
Well, the thing I like about that is that I think it's very nice of you to say. When you get a situation like that, you get a lot of upside because there's still so many people to come on board, potentially for the compliance department.
That one's for you, George.
Now I want to ask you. So we've touched a little bit on Silica Sand.
Yeah, our timer went off, so we'll just ignore that and pretend it doesn't exist, and we'll just keep going.
All right. Well, very briefly, see what you said about talking. For sure, everybody watching this is interested in what's going on with precious metals, in particular silver this week, where this sort of Reddit crowd that's taking on Wall Street is driving up the prices. Is that what's happening?
Yeah, look, yes, absolutely. We are seeing an influx into silver. So first of all, I don't normally do this on the Daily Reckoning Australia channel because the last thing I want to do is direct people's attention elsewhere. But some former colleagues of ours over at Money Morning covered the GameStop saga really well in great detail. So if anybody is curious about finding out what GameStop is doing, what it actually means, I highly recommend you go check out what they're talking about at Money Morning. But the Reddit crowd has now moved into silver. So they've gone from essentially blowing up a gaming company that nobody liked and nobody cared about. Supposedly they've moved on to silver. And there is, I don't know how much you follow Reddit, Callum. I'm on Reddit.
Not at all.
I love Reddit. It's a great way to waste time, and you'll find out the most unusual things there. So I'm following a couple of the Reddit threads. I go under a pseudonym, so nobody would know who I am. There are definitely people pushing into silver. Silver is up nearly 20% in the past 2 days. A quick whip around the globe. Apparently some US bullion dealers are out of supply. They are seeing an absolute run on physical silver over there as the spot price of silver is,
That might be the true of the Perth Mint, actually. I saw something about that.
Well, it might be true for the Perth Mint. I know it's not true for ABC Bullion. I was on the phone to them yesterday and they confirmed that no, if they don't have minted bars ready to go, they certainly have the physical silver in stock, ready to melt down and get into minted bars. But they are well prepared for a run on silver. I don't know about the Perth Mint. I haven't jumped on the phone to anybody there yet, but I can promise you I will be later in the week. One bullion dealer in the US said he has been preparing for this moment for pretty much the past 12 months. He is seeing silver fly out the door, very similar to COVID this time last year. So that is Andy Sheckman from Miles Franklin Precious Metals. And he has made comments that based on the behavior of COVID last year, he said there was a change in the psychology of investors and he wanted to make sure that he had supply for market runs like we're seeing now. Now, I just want to reiterate, in Australia, it's not a shortage of silver, but it is a shortage of silver in refined form. So there is the doré bars at the dealers, but it's just not in the investment grade silver bars. So the mines haven't run out. The trucks are still showing up with physical silver. It just has, if it's not available to buy at a dealership, it's just yet to be refined. I just want to make that very clear before any more conspiracy theories come out. As for whether this is going to break the silver market, I don't think it's going to break the silver market. I do think the silver market is getting an awful lot of attention, especially the paper price. I think, like all things that happen with silver, we're going to see this insane spike. The silver bugs are going to come out and tell you that this is it. This is the one that's going to completely change the silver market. The manipulation's over. I do think it'll settle down in the next couple of weeks. In saying that, I think there's two takeaways for me here. One, it's great to see silver getting some love. But I think investors need to keep in the back of their mind that the silver price can't go too hard and too far. And the reason for that is it's an industrious metal. So the higher the silver price goes, the higher the purchase price of our final goods get. Silver is in virtually everything we touch. So today's price action isn't going to drive silver up to $100 per ounce because as the higher the silver price goes, the more scrap metal comes out of the market. And the more scrap metal that comes out of the market obviously reduces it increases the supply, so it reduces the price. So I don't think we're going to see silver soar higher to, $40 or $50 per ounce. I do think it's going to hover around the $29, $30 mark for the next couple of weeks until it finds a new price point. As for the Reddit crowd, I don't know what we are officially going to call it yet. I'm calling it investor activism until somebody far more clever than me comes up with a more catchy name. But I think for too long, the power of the retail investor has been ignored. And that's what this mobilization of people on Reddit are demonstrating right now. Now, whether there's people here that actually understand the market remains to be seen. It's probably my understanding from going through these threads is I reckon it's a mix of professional traders with amateur traders, followed by anybody just looking for a punt jumping on board. But I think what it shows is just how fragile the markets are and how easily they can be disrupted by retail investors going a certain way. The silver market is a little bit harder to shove in certain directions. You've got to remember it's nearly a $1.5 trillion market versus what was GameStop worth? Like a couple of billion?
I don't actually know, but probably, yeah.
So you're looking at something many multiples of GameStop. It's going to be a lot harder to shove in the direction that GameStop went. But my absolute tale here is don't dismiss the power of retail investors. And I think we're going to see perhaps, this investor activism in other pockets of the market until, some new law is created to prevent it from happening. But I think we need to really understand that retail investors are keen to participate in the market and have now demonstrated their incredible ability to move and alter markets. And as Ryan Dintz, editor over at Money Morning, explained, there's an absolute fragility in the plumbing of the financial system. So there's sort of two sides to this silver squeeze happening. One is, it's exciting for silver. The other thing too is the power of ordinary investors to push markets in a certain direction.
And I don't follow silver a lot, but there's not actually a lot of pure silver stocks on the market, is there? It tends to come as a byproduct of other mines. Is that true?
No. Yeah, look, it's pretty hard. There are a couple of pure silver stocks listed in Australia. There's far more in the North American markets. So with the Aussie dollar so high, it actually makes some of those stocks look a little bit more attractive in our currency. But there's just not many pure silver plays here to, for stocks to jump on board with, unfortunately.
All right, well, we've gone over time, so should we foreshadow what are we going to talk about next week? Or
I don't know. So look, I've always got something to talk about. I could go on for days about some of the things happening in the commodities market. Sometimes I sort of need an adult to reel me back in.
Well, I'll tell you what we're going to talk about, because I've been wondering it myself, and I'm sure everybody watching this is now the time to get back into gold, because as you mentioned, you alluded to this earlier, some of them are down 30, 40%, and the gold price itself in Aussie dollars is not down that much, really. So they've got good cash flows if that holds. So we'll talk about whether now's the time to be scooping up gold stocks again.
I think that's a great topic, and also a topic close to my heart that I can waffle on for ages.
All right, we'll see you then.
All right, thanks, Callum. See you later.